sequência da programação, agora, eu chamo ao palco o Konrad Jagodzinski. Ele é diretor da consultoria inglesa Brand Finance. Welcome. Ele é responsável, a Brand Finance é responsável pela publicação do Global Soft Power Index, um ranking que mede o soft power de países no cenário internacional. A fala dele é Soft Power como estratégia para a internacionalização de negócios globais. Bem-vindo.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It's quite a big title, and forgive me for speaking English, those of you that would like a translation. I think there's a consecutive translation, so you can get the headphones. It's a big title, but basically I just want to talk about soft power from a branding and marketing perspective, talk about nation brands, region brands, city brands, and commercial brands, and how they interact, and what it means for all of us here in this room and beyond. Just a few words about brand finance. We are a brand evaluation strategy consultancy. We have a global presence, including in Brazil. If you want to learn more about us, you can meet Eduardo, our managing director based in Sao Paulo. We've been working for nearly 30 years with brands of all kinds. Commercial brands primarily, but also with place brands, and that's the team I lead as place branding director, nations, regions, and cities all over the world who want to understand perceptions of their brands, who want to know how it relates to their performance, and who want to understand the economic impact of how the brands are performing. And especially when it comes to place brands, as you can see, we've worked with a variety of organizations all over the world, nations, regions, and cities. In Latin America with Prom Peru and with Uruguay 21, responsible for promoting the two countries abroad. So what is soft power? And we all know the academic definition of it, coined by Professor Joseph Nye in the 1980s, as the way of influencing perceptions and behaviors in the international arena through attraction or persuasion rather than coercion. At Brand Finance, we look at soft power from a very practical perspective. What does it actually mean to have soft power? How can I use it? What can I do with it? And we've coined a definition based on that practical application of soft power as the power of perceptions, which can be leveraged by place brands to attract more investment, trade, talent, tourism, and in effect, improve economic growth. And who should care about soft power? Well, it's not just countries, but it's also regions, cities, and the businesses, the commercial brands based in those places, because there is that reciprocal relationship when it comes to soft power, when it comes to building perceptions. What they think about the country affects what people think about the region, the city, and the businesses based there. And vice versa. As a business, you're an ambassador for your city, for your region, for your country, depending on who it is that you're talking to or doing business with. So it's basically a connected world of those different levels of brands that we need to be mindful of. And obviously a strong brand reinforces the other brands with its strength, but a weak brand undermines the others with its weaknesses. And that's why it's important to work on those brands. We think of branding as this sort of virtuous circle. You invest in the brand to improve its perceptions, to get better performance, and to, in effect, improve economic growth. And the more growth you have, obviously, the more you have money to invest further into this virtuous circle. And, well, we wouldn't be here if we didn't believe that was the case. I mean, it's probably something that all marketers believe. You need to invest in the brand to improve its performance and then to get the return on investment. It's as simple as that. But it's a nice theory, but does it actually work? Is it actually true for a nation brand to produce more attractiveness and better performance in attracting more investment, trade, talent, and tourism? We're a data company in many respects, or a strategic consultancy which uses data in our daily work. So we looked at the relationship between the results of the Global Soft Power Index, which is the study that we run, and performance of nation brands across those key sectors of investment, trade, talent, tourism, attraction. And as you can see, there's a very clear and strong association between perceptions and performance of nation brands. And I believe we can think the same is applicable to regions and to cities. So what this means is that the variation in scores when it comes to perceptions of a country correlates to 34% of the variation in foreign direct investment inflows, 60% of net exports, 60% of net student migration, and 47% of tourism receipts. And especially for those sort of public-driven sectors, as you can see, those correlations are really high. When it comes to investment, it's still a very strong one, but we have to appreciate there's other things that come into play when we think about investment decisions. And obviously, they're not made by the public, they're made by business decision makers. And this is based on a perception study among the public. But it's still, when you think about it, 1/3 of investment decision making correlates to perceptions of a country. And that's all very well, and we can think, okay, there is that relationship, it's all natural, it's all going in its own course, the world is becoming closer together, we have globalization, we can just rely on this to go on in perpetuity, we don't really have to do anything. And when we were to look at data, that's the Nation Brands Index by Anhalt and our Global Soft Power Index on the right, you can see there is that sort of steady inflation of perception scores for nation brands over time. So it's very easy to assume this is just happening. You don't really have to manage a nation brand. You don't have to think about it. They're all going to go up forever. And that might be true for the top nation brands, for the ones that actually already have a positioning, already are appreciated, and are investing relatively a lot into their nation brand image. But what we did with the Global Soft Power Index is that we extended it to cover all the member states of the United Nations. So we rank all the 193 countries of the world. And the first time that we had a year-on-year trend of that huge data set, we noticed an interesting thing, that indeed for the top nation brands, there was an inflation of scores on average, with obviously outliers and differences between them, but on average, as you can see, they all went up year on year. At the same time, the weaker, the smaller nation brands at the bottom of the ranking, on average, decreased in soft power year on year. And it's very difficult to explain that in any other way than that the world basically is a zero-sum game when it comes to soft power, that they are competing with each other. And while the winners continue on winning, you know, the rich are getting richer type of argument, the weaker nation brands, even though they haven't done anything in particular to undermine their reputation in that year, by virtue of just being smaller, less familiar, not investing enough into their nation brands, they saw a year-on-year erosion in their soft power. And that's a wake-up call, because it shows that unless you actually do something about your nation brand, it is not going to grow and go on and improve out of its own volition. People have a very finite capacity for developing a relationship with nation brands. We don't wake up thinking about all the 193 countries of the world. We wake up thinking probably of our own country and a couple of others. And maybe once a week we're going to think about a few others, and once a month about a few others. And when we go on holiday once a year or every 2 years, we're going to think of some other country when we're choosing that holiday. And that's what this tells us, that this is hard work. And unless you put in that hard work, and in the case of nation branding, it normally means investing in that nation brand, it's not going to work. Standing still is not an option. And putting that work is extremely important, and it does work. This graph shows familiarity to online mentions. And you can see there is a relatively strong correlation between familiarity and online mentions of countries within the Global Soft Power Index. That's for the top 50 brands alone, but it already tells you quite a potent story, that obviously the more there is being said about your country online, the more familiar it becomes to people around the world. And that's obvious, but you don't really want to be at the bottom of that graph. You want to be at the top of it. And that requires funding. But what drives soft power? We look at two key performance indicators apart from familiarity: reputation and influence. And I'll talk about the whole methodology later on, but just to give you an understanding of why what it is that you do in creative industries matters. We have 35 nation brand attributes that summarize the different characteristics of a country, and we've isolated 6 of them that can be tied back to the creative industries. Influential in arts and entertainment, appealing lifestyle, easy to communicate with, trustworthy media, affairs I follow closely, and influential media. These are the terms that we ask our respondents within the survey if they associate countries with them. And out of the 35, these 6 relate to creative industries. And as you can see, they do play an important role in driving both reputation and influence of countries in the mix of those 35, and even more so when it comes to the influence of countries than they do when it comes to reputation, which is quite interesting. So what this tells us, and the data is based on a statistical regression analysis that looks at how people answer the survey. So we don't ask them explicitly, do you think this is important? We look at how they answer the survey when they answer about the reputation or the influence of a country, and which nation brand attributes they pick. And that has told us that nearly 13% of reputation depends on perceptions around creative industries, and over 19% of influence of a country depends on perceptions around creative industries. So quite a significant impact that everything that you're doing can have on a nation brand abroad. But it isn't just about the creative industries, and I think that's what's quite visible out of that previous slide. It's 12, it's 19%, it's not 100%. Naturally, there's so many other things that are happening within the country and that a country undertakes to promote itself abroad that have an impact on how it is seen, how its perceptions are created. The key is in coordinating all of those different channels, and we're seeing that countries that do that are more effective. It's the synergies between the sectors, it's the strategic approach, it's the coordination from the government and discussion with civil society and with the private sector to look for how we can present ourselves as a nation abroad. And it is about bringing together that public diplomacy, trade, tourism, sports promotion, big events, the diaspora, regions and cities alongside the nation, culture, creative industries, climate action, education, development, etc., etc. And a few examples of countries that have done that successfully. China is a very good one. It's a country that when we started doing the ranking in 2020, before the pandemic, it ranked 9th in the Global Soft Power Index. It is now 3rd. in just those 5-6 iterations of the study, it's become one of the top 3 nation brands in the world. Sorry, it's second now out of 5th. So still, I mean, from 5th to 2nd, that's quite a leap. And that's underpinned by a few very good examples here of where it ranks across the Global Soft Power Index. On affairs I follow closely, that's where it ranked 9th, it's now 3rd. So people wake up thinking more about China for whatever reason, good or bad. But it's then also how they appreciate what it is that China offers. And when it comes to products and brands the world loves, it ranks 5th in the world. When it comes to being helpful to other countries in need, it ranks 14th. And it was 23rd, so basically didn't almost register at all. Now suddenly it is one of those countries that people associate with benevolence, with support, with global leadership. So on all of those aspects, it's improved, and it's improving fast compared to many other countries. Why? Well, China has been investing very heavily in infrastructure, both at home and abroad, through the Belt and Road Initiative. It basically offers others to collaborate with it through big financial investments across Latin America too. That has helped boost trade, that has helped provide entry points for Chinese brands to those markets, and it's just perpetuated itself. But it's also the cultural influence, it's also an unprecedented sustainability push, and now post-COVID, China is also opening up in terms of tourism on a huge scale. And obviously it's a very vast country, so there's so much to see that people didn't really think was particularly interesting up to a point on a global, universal level. Now that's changing, that's becoming more accessible. South Korea, and we heard earlier from David from Coca, I mean, it's a fantastic example of a country that has made a very conscious decision to become a soft power superpower. From a country that ranked 14th, it now ranks 12th in the Global Soft Power Index. It obviously has this huge capacity when it comes to tech and innovation, and it has had that for many years. As you can see, that rank hasn't changed. It's in the top 5, and it has been since the beginning of when we've been running this study. But they've built a capacity alongside it for promoting culture. And when it comes to being perceived as influential in arts and influential in the media, it's gone up from 10th to 7th on both accounts. And that's not a coincidence. Again, it's obviously a great product. It's fantastic music, fantastic drama, fantastic digital content, but there's a lot of money behind it, and an end-to-end solution in fostering that whole ecosystem that has helped it become such a global success. And as you can see, it's not even a secret. We had David talking about it in detail as how this all comes about. And it's almost unconscionable that other countries aren't copying that model immediately, because it works so well. I mean, obviously, every country has its own specificity, it'll have its own products, its own strengths that it would want to promote, but still, I mean, there's so much every country could learn from South Korea. And I don't know if you all registered how much money that is, because David gave the number in Korean won. He's at 680 billion Korean won. It's over 420 million US dollars every year just to support and promote Korean culture abroad. And then on top of that, there are additional funds from the private sector. There are additional government initiatives to support education, for example, a few years ago, which is what I asked David about as well. So it just shows that there is a need for that ecosystem to be fostered. There is a need for government intervention and support if we want this to be a success on a global scale. And it did take years. It didn't happen overnight. Another good example of how a small country can instantly become recognizable around the world is El Salvador. And love him or hate him, but President Bukele has put the country on the map literally for many different reasons. There's obviously crackdown on crime and gangs that has both actually resulted in more security and safety within the country, but also made the news around the world for how El Salvador has dealt with it. He's introduced economic reforms. He's even adopted Bitcoin as a legal tender. I mean, all of those things obviously put a country on the map because it immediately is something novel, something interesting, something bold, something that shows there's an agenda, there's confidence, there is a plan, there's a vision. And again, love that vision or hate it and the means to achieve it. But it's definitely effective in terms of building that nation brand and making it more and more appealing to people around the world. And El Salvador was this year the fastest growing nation brand in the Global Soft Power Index, jumping up from 117th to 82nd in the Global Soft Power Index in just a year. And that's in huge contrast to all of the other nation brands in the bottom of the ranking that were seeing an erosion of their scores without necessarily having done anything to undermine their perceptions. And an example of a country that isn't necessarily doing badly in terms of soft power, but which is seeing a gradual erosion of its soft power over time, the United Kingdom. It's obviously a global soft power superpower. It has ranked third or second for many years. But this year, it went down from second to third, overtaken by China for the first time. And as you can see, it's grown in its soft power score over time, 10.6 points out of 100. But it's grown at a lower pace than China and the United Arab Emirates, which are also in the top 10. And it is the pace of that improvement, it is the ambition of a country, it is the resources the country puts behind this push that make the difference. And the United Kingdom is obviously an established nation brand, well recognized for all sorts of reasons, including conquering half of the world. But it also has those fantastic soft power assets, the BBC, the British Council, the Premier League, and all sorts of other ways of touching the lives of others around the world. But just relying on them to carry on and do their own work can only go so far, especially when the competition is so strong, because China or South Korea or the United Arab Emirates and many other countries are investing heavily into their nation brands. So before I go into where Brazil ranks and how it's doing in the ranking, let me just quickly introduce you to our methodology. The Global Soft Power Index is the world's largest study on perceptions of nation brands. We do our research in 102 countries among over 150,000 respondents. We ask them questions about 55 different metrics and about all the 193 member states of the United Nations. So all the countries in blue is where we do the research. All the countries in gray are also ranked within the index, even if we don't do research there. It all starts with measuring familiarity. The whole study is based entirely on perceptions, entirely on the results of the survey. There is no particular judgment from me. We don't have a jury. We don't have statistical data. We just ask our respondents to give us their impressions of all of those countries. And it all starts with familiarity. We ask them, how well do you know this country? And if they know it well enough, they ask additional questions. How reputable do you think it is? How influential do you think it is? And what do you associate it with? The nation brand attributes. And then we also ask them, would you recommend this country as a destination to work in, to study in, to visit, to invest in, to buy products and services from? And that gives us an understanding through the regression analysis that I mentioned, how those different nation brand attributes drive the reputation, the influence, and the attractiveness of countries across those sectors. So it's an incredibly helpful strategic tool, as well as a way of identifying strengths and weaknesses. We don't look at soft power just as the realm of culture and values and people and the creative industries. I mentioned that before. The creative industries account for around 12% of reputation and around 20% of influence. But there are so many other metrics, from business to diplomacy to education and science, governance, sustainability, that we also take into account when measuring soft power. And all of them matter in different ways, with business and trade being the most important pillar. So how strong and stable your economy appears, how successful your products and brands are, how easy it is to do business with your country, consistently shows up as the key most important metrics among all the respondents around the world. And I mentioned we tie it back to the real-world outcomes to understand how those perceptions affect performance across investment, trade, talent, education, and tourism attraction. And again, we can look at how the different nation brand attributes shape perceptions across those sectors. So it becomes a very strong strategic tool to help countries understand what they need to invest in, how they need to prioritize, what they should be promoting, what they should be featuring within their messaging when it comes to marketing communications abroad and brand building in general. So where is Brazil? It ranks 31st in the Global Soft Power Index. So not bad, but also, well, it's a vast country with such a huge population, with so much potential. And it probably deserves better than 31st. So the question is, what is it that people recognize as the strengths of Brazil, and what is it that they recognize as its weaknesses? These are the rankings that Brazil achieves across the different nation brand attributes, and we've got a selection of 4 strengths and 4 weaknesses. And those are the top 4 attributes and the bottom 4 attributes. And as you can see, it's seen as the #1 fun country in the world. It's the #1 country when it comes to leadership in sports. It's seen as very friendly. It's seen as having influence in arts and entertainment. And obviously that's good news for the creative industries, that they are being noticed around the world, creative industries from Brazil. But again, as I said, on their own, they're not going to do the trick. And there are key weaknesses that are undermining Brazil's situation when it comes to nation brand strength, when it comes to creating and acting upon its soft power, and that's governance. Perceptions of Brazil's governance are basically weak. Out of all the 193 countries, it ranks 152nd for safety and security. So basically, it's not seen as safe or secure at all. Very low on ethical standards and corruption, very low on trust, and very low on political stability and good governance. And I think that's a powerful message to the politicians and to the government that the creative industries on their own, the private sector on their own, the civil society on their own are not going to do this. This needs to be a concerted effort. This needs to be a joint initiative where there is obviously reforms, but there is also a communication of how those reforms are being implemented and how situations are improving across the country. And we also look at perceptions of cities in the Brand Finance Global City Index. And it's a very similar structure and initiative. Just like the Global Soft Power Index, it started with expert consultations, with pilot studies. We produce all of our research in a very thorough way, starting with consulting the academia, the practitioners, building the list of attributes, testing it in the field, and then producing the actual surveys and indices. That study is taking into consideration 20 markets only, rather than 100. It's a new study, so in the sense we're still looking for more support and sponsors. If Rio would like to join, if other cities in Brazil would like to join and subscribe to it, we'd welcome that with open arms. And it looks at familiarity and reputation. It looks at different pillars of city attractiveness. and a list of 45 attributes, but we also look at, instead of influence of cities, because it's difficult conceptually to say that a city has influence, we're looking at consideration of that city across 7 dimensions, as a place to live in, work remotely from, as a digital nomad, for example, to study in, to retire, to visit, and to invest in. And there's an adjusted list of 45 city brand attributes that take into account the different aspects, characteristics of city life, attractiveness, and we ask our respondents whether they associate cities with these attributes. And in that way, we identify what drives reputation, what drives consideration across those 7 dimensions. We rank 100 cities from all across the world, including Rio and including Sao Paulo from Brazil. So where is Rio? Well, it's number 1 for outstanding cultural festivals, which is not a surprise. It's number 3 on fun. It's famous for sports teams and clubs. It's seen as diverse and multicultural. But again, there's a huge issue with governance when it's almost bottom of the ranking for crime and terrorism, well, probably more crime than terrorism. Its economy, it's not seen as particularly strong and stable. And it's also not particularly associated with science or technology and with skilled workforce. So that's also bad news for the creative industries, because it might be more difficult to attract talent if people are not associating this place with those particular attributes. So again, it's not just about developing a niche and having a strength in culture, in sports, in this, that, or the other, or being an open place. It's extremely important, but on its own, it's not going to do the trick. It's not going to build an image that's strong enough. And it is about addressing the weaknesses around governance, around perceptions of the economy. That is equally important, and that is something that requires a lot of effort and coordination. And a nation, or in this case a city brand strategy, where the different stakeholders are brought together, where there's a vision, what do we stand for, what are our values, what describes us best, and how can we make other people discover that, and how can we make sure that this vision also reflects reality, and how is that reality becoming better every day, so that those perceptions could become better every day as well. That brings me to the end of it, and welcome questions. Thank you.
Quem tiver perguntas, é só levantar a mão.
Boa tarde, tudo bem? Eu sou Léo Feijó, Secretaria Municipal de Cultura. Feliz de ver que o Rio de Janeiro está... tradução. Parabéns pela apresentação e obrigado. Vou falar devagar para facilitar o tradutor, ou tradutora. E, bom, sou carioca, nasci no Rio e trabalho muito para que a gente construa essa cidade que você apresenta como muito bem colocada em termos de arte, cultura, lifestyle, né? E tem outras questões que a gente precisa melhorar. Eu queria que você pudesse comentar, talvez, exemplos de outras cidades no mundo que tinham posições semelhantes à do Rio de Janeiro e que conseguiram subir no seu ranking, e o que elas fizeram para mudar isso. Obrigado.
Thank you for that question. We've only been running the study for 2 years, so I don't have that much trend data on how countries have been improving, but we're already seeing countries like, cities like, for example, Dubai, which have improved immensely, even in that 1 year that we've been running this study. And a city that was basically not even there 50 years ago and now is seen as one of the capitals of the world, really, one of the key cities to go to for business, but also for pleasure, for tourism. So that obviously requires a lot of money and a lot of effort, but it is possible, and it is something that other cities can learn from. But obviously, being an established city with established strengths but also established weaknesses is a different ballgame than being a new city that can create its own brand out of a vision and out of huge investments. So it is probably trickier, it's probably more difficult for a city like Rio to completely turn it around, and it can't be done through marketing alone, because you can't market something that isn't there. So if there is an issue with safety, then that's just something that needs to be addressed on a policy level, first of all, and but also that doesn't necessarily mean don't market Rio abroad because it's not safe. No, it's something that has to be acknowledged. It's something that has to be somehow included in the city brand communications, because it can't just be there as an elephant in the room, right? It has to be something that people already think about, because that's what the data shows. So we can't ignore that, and we need to address it in one way or another.
Boa tarde. Sobre os indicadores do Rio de Janeiro, bom, enfim, eu sou Luciane Gorgulho, do BNDES, do Banco Nacional de Desenvolvimento Econômico e Social do governo brasileiro. Sobre os indicadores, me chamou a atenção, nós sabemos que Rio de Janeiro e muitas cidades do Brasil não vão bem no ranking de segurança pública, e nós sabemos o quão difícil é solucionar isso. Mas me chamou a atenção o Rio de Janeiro não ir bem no ranking de, não me lembro exatamente o termo, educação, ciência, algo assim, que me remete à questão de universidades, etc., porque o Rio de Janeiro tem muitas universidades, e as melhores universidades do país, talvez apenas atrás da USP, Unicamp, em alguns momentos acima da USP, Unicamp, lá de São Paulo. Por que nós, tendo os melhores instituições de ensino, o que falta, em termos pragmáticos, pela sua experiência, para melhorarmos nesse ranking, que esse, acredito que seja mais possível, mais fácil melhorarmos?
Thank you for that question. We often see that gap between perception and reality. You'd know that your city has a certain strength, your country has a certain strength, but it's somehow not getting through to people elsewhere. They're not recognizing it in their perception study. And that's often the case. And there might be two reasons for it. One, it might be that it just isn't communicated well enough. And there needs to be a concerted effort and an investment behind it to market that in an appropriate and in a successful and impactful way. But it could also be the matter of positioning and obviously the audiences that you're trying to talk to. When it comes to science and education, there'll be very specific audiences you want to target rather than just the general public. It'd be students, it'd be academics, it would be innovators and scientists. But on a more general, in a more general picture, that might be getting lost even if you're communicating it to a particular audience, because the general public would probably be recognizing Rio for culture, for lifestyle, for openness, for friendliness, for all sorts of other things that might be overshadowing the other strengths that you have. And we see that with many brands, that you can't be everything to everyone. It's very difficult. You have to be a city that's extremely well known to people, to have different faces, like London or Paris. You don't just think about London and Paris as tourism destinations. You think of them as centers of commerce, as centers of education and science, because we got to know it better. We have more capacity to understand more things about it. A city that has lower familiarity globally, that's always going to be a challenge, because it's very difficult to have those different faces presented all the time to all of the people all around the world. So it might not be achievable to turn that around for everyone, but it's about prioritizing, it's about understanding where does that sit within my strategy, who do I want to attract, who do I want to present this face of Rio to in particular, and how do I go about achieving that. And there's plenty of examples of countries or cities that are struggling with with that sort of issue when it comes to positioning. We've worked for New Zealand, for example, and the issue with New Zealand is that it's considered as this fantastic destination for tourism. It's beautiful landscapes, pristine nature, and that's great, and people go there to visit, and obviously tourism is growing. But that in itself is actually undermining the image of New Zealand as a destination for innovation, as a destination for talent, for studying there. So they had to identify that through research that we've provided them with, and then they had to understand how to prioritize this, knowing that they do have innovation, they do have fantastic universities, they even have a space industry in New Zealand, but who knows about that? So they decided, okay, well, we can't just be talking about mountains and rivers and forests and the sea, we have to be talking about science and innovation, and to particular audiences in particular countries where we want them to realize there's more to New Zealand, there's more to Rio than what people know already.
Konrad.
Yeah.
Olá. Uma pergunta. Você mostrou que as nações que vão bem vão cada vez melhor e as nações que vão mal, às vezes, vão cada vez mais mal. E eu queria saber o que você acha, pelo que você conhece, né, do tempo fazendo a pesquisa, que faz mudar essa trajetória de desenvolvimento, né? O Schumpeter diria que a inovação, a tecnologia faz o país conseguir mudar a trajetória de desenvolvimento. O que você acha que faz a gente mudar essa trajetória?
That's a good question. How to break out of that sort of middle soft power trap? It's almost like a middle income trap, but in the case of a nation brand. I think, first of all, you need to have a nation brand strategy. That's the first thing that helps countries break through that trap and improve rapidly, because basically there's all the different stakeholders, all the different people that have something to offer from within a country. They're working towards one goal. They're going to be doing it in different ways. They're going to be leveraging different assets. They're going to be talking to different audiences, and they're going to be talking slightly differently to different audiences. But as long as they agree in principle on what we stand for, what our values are, who we are, and how we want to articulate that in broad terms, that's what makes that message more consistent, more powerful, and more impactful, ultimately. So I think that's one thing, having that nation brand strategy and executing it in a coherent and consistent and impactful, ultimately, way. And the second thing, unfortunately, is money. You need to put money behind it, and that's what Korea is doing, for example. That's what, obviously, China is doing with the infrastructure projects and all sorts of other things. And that is paying off. But then, you don't necessarily have to have just, the money. And there's a country like El Salvador that doesn't necessarily have a lot of money, but it's got enough resolve and enough determination to show that we're able to do this. And we say we're going to do it, and we're doing it. And delivering on your brand promise, if you like, is an extremely powerful thing. It's much worse if you've got so much to offer, but then you basically offer disillusionment to the different people that you're promising fantastic things. So it's also about delivering on the brand promise. I think that's the third thing that I would say really matters. Yeah.
Oi, prazer. Eu sou Patrícia, sou professora da SPM, trabalho com marketing territorial já há alguns anos. E em pesquisas acadêmicas e de mercado, nós percebemos que sempre tem uma dificuldade muito grande na composição da amostra, e principalmente quando a gente fala de marketing territorial, é a percepção da pessoa que mora no lugar e a percepção do turista ou da pessoa que não mora, mas conhece aquela cidade ou aquele país. E você acabou passando muito rápido pela parte da metodologia, eu fiquei extremamente curiosa em saber como se deu essa amostra e como é que você separa essa percepção de quem é do lugar e de quem não é do lugar, porque acaba tendo peso muito grande no ranqueamento. Se você puder falar, eu te agradeço muito.
Absolutely. The local perceptions, the domestic perceptions, and the international ones are going to be completely different. In the indices themselves, in the ranking themselves, we don't take the domestic perceptions, the local perceptions into account. So the ranking you saw for Rio or the ranking you saw for Brazil, that only takes into account the outside perspective. But we do measure those those local perceptions too, and in our analysis, when we work with nation brands or city brands, we talk to them about the differences and what we can learn from that, because there's obviously quite a lot that you can learn from how a city or a country sees itself and how others see it, both in terms of identifying the strengths that we're perhaps not leveraging enough, but also identifying the pitfalls before a crisis hits, because our own people probably know what the problems are before anybody else can point it out. So there's definitely a lot of value in looking at both and comparing and contrasting them, and we do that. But within the study itself, we only look at the outside perspective. When it comes to sampling, this is a general public sample, and with a study that big, we're not able to profile the audience more. So we work with a general public sample of adult population within all of the 102 countries that we do the research in, and those samples are representative demographically of age, gender, and the regional distribution of people within a country. And we then also monitor the language they speak in countries where it matters for representation. We also monitor ethnicity, so for example in South Africa or in the United States, to make sure that the minorities are represented. And we also look at education and employment to make sure that, again, that's representative of the population at large. Yeah.
Boa tarde, meu nome é Pedro Henrique Jasmin e eu tenho uma dúvida, na verdade, sobre a pesquisa também, que é, entendendo que países mais desenvolvidos têm outro momento e é difícil comparar, às vezes, com a nossa realidade na América Latina, principalmente quando a gente olha os indicadores. E aí a minha dúvida são 2 pontos, na verdade. O primeiro é entender se a pesquisa faz algum tipo de separação geográfica ou por PIB. E 2, entender quem está melhor ranqueado dentro da América Latina e levando em consideração também casos como a cidade de Medellín, que ficou marcada pelo narcotráfico ou pela gestão do Pablo Escobar e hoje vive um outro momento e uma outra narrativa. Então, queria saber se a pesquisa olha isso e faz esse tipo de separação também.
The results we saw were global results, so they were not separated, but we obviously do separate them for analytical purposes. When we work for a nation or a country, for a nation or a city, we would segment the data by markets, by particular demographics, to understand how different people in different parts of the world and within a country see the nation or the city brand. So we can certainly segment that. Brazil is actually the top-ranked nation brand across all of Latin America and the Caribbean. So, but that also is quite a shocking story, because that means that it ranks 31st. There is no Latin American country in the top 30, and I think that's a big challenge. How we construct the index is that it's not based on GDP, it's based on population. So we look at the 102 countries across the world. We have a representative sample within each market, and then we weigh the data from across those different markets to arrive at the global one. And we give each country 50% of the 50% of the scores they contribute as a sort of one country, one vote rule, so that there is a representation of even the smaller populations, and then the other 50% of the vote is given to the weight of the population from a given country. So the perceptions coming from China and from India and from Brazil and Indonesia and the United States, where the populations are very big, carry more weight within the study. But at the same time, because we have that one country, one vote rule, smaller countries, their voices are not drowned in this, and also those from Estonia or Slovenia or a smaller country like Uruguay, they also count within the main study. Yeah.
Boa tarde, meu nome é Alessandra, sou professora da PUC-Rio. Primeiro, obrigada pela apresentação. Minha dúvida também é metodológica, né? A gente teve hoje pela manhã a apresentação do mapeamento, né, das cidades, né, do estado do Rio de Janeiro, feito pela Firjan, com uma metodologia muito própria, né, para o estudo daqueles territórios. Então, minha pergunta é, vocês usam a mesma metodologia para mapear nation brands e city brands, ou vocês têm algum tipo de adaptação, porque eu acredito que sejam, né, objetos diferentes, ou vocês usam exatamente o mesmo questionário, a mesma metodologia?
Well, so I understand Firjan has actually used our study to understand perceptions of Rio de Janeiro and the region and what matters within any place brand. So we're very happy about that, and obviously please do use the study as much as you can. There's links available in the presentation. When it comes to our methodology, it's based entirely on a survey. So we basically take all the countries of the world into account in the Global Soft Power Index, and we ask our respondents to give their views. So in that sense, we don't really do a selection or a mapping of any sort. It's basically all the countries ranked. When it comes to cities, we compiled a list of 100 global cities that would have enough familiarity across the 20 markets that we did the research in our presumption. And we also looked at population and the economy of those cities and the general sort of cultural impact that they have as well. So that's how we arrived at the list. I'm not sure if that answers your question. Thank you.
That's it.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Muito obrigada.